My name is Jamie Patton, and this is my presentation on sexual violence. Around our world today, sexual violence has become an increasingly horrifying issue. It can show up in mild forms and it can show up in the worst forms, and it shows up in every country and every society around the world. First, I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of my presentation as far as how it's organized, as well as the different concepts that I'll be talking about. The first portion of my video is going to be strictly about sexual violence. It's going to include how it's defined, how it consumes different parts of the world, different countries, different communities, basically just all of my research on it. The second portion of my video is going to be the impact that globalization has had on sexual violence. The third portion is going to be organizations that have helped sexual violence, helped address the issue worldwide and just locally in their own countries. And finally, the fourth portion of this video is going to be my suggested action plan when it comes to sexual violence and how to further address or prevent sexual violence in the future. How is sexual violence defined? I think that this is a major point because it seems that sexual violence is very underrated when it comes to people knowing about the occurrence of it. And that's mainly because it can present itself in many different forms. People don't realize that sexual violence is really any sexual act towards somebody who doesn't want it. Which brings me to the topic of rape. Rape within marriage can happen, rape even within dating relationships can happen, especially rape by strangers. Those are all different forms, but it really doesn't matter the relationship that the offender has to the victim, because if it's not wanted, it's not wanted, and it is considered sexual violence. And the sad fact is about 1/3 of adolescent girls in the world report that their first sexual experience was reported as being forced. Looking at an even bigger aspect, 1 in every 3 women worldwide have experienced some sort of physical or sexual violence throughout their lifetime. And if you think about it, if you put that in perspective, if there was only 1 million women in the world, about 300,000 of those women would have been abused in some sort of sexual violent way. Now let's move on to the factors that really contribute to why these acts of sexual violence are committed onto women. The first one being poverty. Poverty is a huge factor of sexual violence, mainly because it makes men feel less masculine. They're frustrated, they're angry, and their way to exert that is to make them feel more masculine by making them feel like they have power. Substance abuse is also a form of poverty that can definitely lead to sexual violence. If a man feels like he can't provide for his woman anymore, and he resorts to things that possibly make him feel better, but then make him act in a way that he wouldn't normally act. The next contributing factor that I want to talk about is the physical and social environment of a community. Within a community, the social norms are very important because really it doesn't matter what laws are in place. If something is foreseen right or wrong in a community, that's usually what people tend to go by. In countries like Australia and Sweden, men are seen as very superior to women. Their entitlement to sex is much higher. And both of those countries actually do have the highest rates of sexual violence in the world. As you can see here, Australia and Sweden both have very high percentages when it comes to the occurrence of sexual violence, but they differ a lot in the form of sexual violence. In Sweden, gang violence is becoming a bigger problem as time progresses, and their main form is rape. The safety of women is just not safe in Sweden. As where in Australia, it's more so domestic violence. And majority of these crimes are happening because a woman will decide to leave her partner and then he then commits sexual violence against her.